was the king. For Olaf was known in all countries as handsomer, stronger, and braver than all others, although, after he had left Russia, he retained no more of his name than that he was called Ole, and was Russian. Now when the messenger came to the fortune-teller, and gave himself out for the king, he got the answer, "Thou art not the king, but I advise thee to be faithful to thy king." And more he would not say to that man. The man returned, and told Olaf, and his desire to meet the fortune-teller was increased. And now he had no doubt of his being really a fortune-teller. Olaf prepared himself to him, and, entering into conversation, asked him if he could foresee how it would go with him with regard to his kingdom, or of any other fortune he was to have. The hermit replies in a holy spirit of prophecy, "Thou wilt become a renowned king, and do celebrated deeds. Many men wilt thou bring to faith and baptism, and both to thy own and others' good. And that thou mayst have no doubt of the truth of this answer, listen to these tokens. When thou comest to thy ships, many of thy people will conspire against thee, and then a battle will follow in which many of thy men will fall, and thou wilt be wounded almost to death, and carried upon the shield to thy ship. Yet after 7 days thou shalt be well of thy wounds, and immediately thou shalt let thyself be baptized." Soon after Olaf went down to his ships, where he met some mutineers and people who would destroy him and his men. A fight took place, and the result was what the hermit had predicted, that Olaf was wounded, and carried upon a shield to his ship, and that his wound was healed in 7 days. Then Olaf perceived that the man had spoken truth, that he was a true fortune-teller, and had the gift of prophecy. Olaf went once more to the hermit, and asked particularly how he came to have such wisdom in foreseeing things to be. The hermit replied, that the Christian God himself let him know all that he desired. And he brought before Olaf many great proofs of the power of the Almighty. In consequence of this encouragement, Olaf agreed to let himself be baptized, and he and all his followers were baptized forthwith. He remained here a long time, took the true faith, and got with him priests and other learned men. 33. Olaf marries Gyda. In autumn, AD 988, Olaf sailed from Scilly to England, where he put into a harbor, but proceeded in a friendly way. For England was Christian, and he himself had become Christian. At this time a summons to a thing went through the country, that all men should come to hold a thing. Now when the thing was assembled, a queen called Gyda came to it, a sister of Olaf Kvamme, who was king of Dublin in Ireland. She had been married to a great earl in England, and after his death she was at the head of his dominions. In her territory there was a man called Alfheim, who was a great champion and single combat man. He had paid his addresses to her, but she gave for answer that she herself would choose whom of the men in her dominions she would take in marriage. And on that account the thing was assembled, that she might choose a husband. Alfheim came there dressed out in his best clothes, and there were many well-dressed men at the meeting. Olaf had come there also, but had on his bad weather clothes, and a coarse over garment, and stood with his people apart from the rest of the crowd. Gyda went round and looked at each, to see if any appeared to her a suitable man. Now when she came to where Olaf stood, she looked at him straight in the face, and asked what sort of man he was. He said, "I am called Ole, and I am a stranger here." Gyda replied, "Wilt thou have me if I choose thee?" "I will not say no to that," answered he. And he asked what her name was, and her family, and descent. "I am called Gyda," said she, "and am daughter of the King of Ireland, and was married in this country to an earl who ruled over this territory. Since his death I have ruled over it, and many have courted me, but none to whom I would choose to be married." She was a young and handsome woman. They afterwards talked over the matter together, and agreed, and Olaf and Gyda were betrothed. 34. King Olaf and Alfheim's duel. Alfheim was very ill pleased with this. It was the custom then in England, if two strove for anything, to settle the matter by single combat, 1. And now Alfheim challenges Olaf Tryggvason to fight about this business. The time and place for the combat were settled, and that each should have 12 men with them. When they met, Olaf told his men to do exactly as they saw him do. He had a large axe, and when Alfheim was going to cut at him with his sword, he hewed away the sword out of his hand, and with the next blow struck down Alfheim himself. He then bound him fast. It went in the same way with all Alfheim's men. They were beaten down, bound, and carried to Olaf's lodging. Thereupon he ordered Alfheim to quit the country, and never appear in it again. And Olaf took all his property. Olaf in this way got Jada in marriage, and lived sometimes in England, and sometimes in Ireland. Endnotes: 1. From gang, so called because the combatants went to a home, or uninhabited isle to fight in Norway. L. 35. King Olaf gets his dog Vage. While Olaf was in Ireland, he was once on an expedition which went by sea. As they required to make a foray for provisions on the coast, some of his men landed, and drove down a large herd of cattle to the strand. Now a peasant came up, and entreated Olaf to give him back the cows that belonged to him. Olaf told him to take his cows, if he could distinguish them. But don't delay your march. The peasant had with him a large house dog, which he put in among the herd of cattle, in which many hundred head of beasts were driven together. The dog ran into the herd, and drove out exactly the number which the peasant had said he wanted. And all were marked with the same mark, which showed that the dog knew the right beasts, and was very sagacious. Olaf then asked the peasant if he would sell him the dog. "I would rather give him to you," said the peasant. Olaf immediately presented him with a gold ring in return, and promised him his friendship and future. This dog was called Vage, and was the very best of dogs, and Olaf owned him long afterwards. 36. Harald Gormson sails against Iceland. The Danish king, Harald Gormson, heard that Earl Hakon had thrown off Christianity, and had plundered far and wide in the Danish land. The Danish king levied an army, with which he went to Norway. And when he came to the country which Earl Hakon had to rule over, he laid waste the whole land, and came with his fleet to some islands called Solander. Only 5 houses were left standing in Meridol. But all the people fled up to the mountains, and into the forest, taking with them all the movable goods they could carry with them. Then the Danish king proposed to sail with his fleet to Iceland, to avenge the mockery and scorn all the Icelanders had shown towards him. For they had made a law in Iceland, that they should make as many lampoons against the Danish king as there were headlands in his country. And the reason was, because a vessel which belonged to certain Icelanders was stranded in Denmark, and the Danes took all the property, and called it wreck. One of the king's bailiffs called Berger was to blame for this. But the lampoons were made against both. And the lampoons were the following lines: "The gallant Harald in the field, between his legs lets drop his shield. Into a pony he was changed, and kicked his shield, and safely ranged. And Berger, he who dwells in Hull, for safety built with 4 stone walls, that these might be a worthy pair, was changed into a pony mare." 37. Harald sends a warlock to Iceland. King Harald called a warlock to hide to Iceland in some altered shape, and to try what he could learn there to tell him, and he set out in the shape of a whale. And when he came near to the land, he went to the west side of Iceland, north around the land, where he saw all the mountains and hills full of guardian spirits, some great, some small. When he came to Vapnafjord, he went in towards the land, intending to go on shore. But a huge dragon rushed down the dale against him with a train of serpents, adders, and toads, that blew poison towards him. Then he turned to go westward around the land as far as Ijafjord, and he went into the fjord. Then a bird flew against him, which was so great that its wings stretched over the mountains on either side of the fjord, and many birds, great and small, with it. Then he swam far to west, and then south into Bredafjord. When he came into the fjord, a large grey bull ran against him, wading into the sea, and bellowing fearfully, and he was followed by a crowd of wild spirits. From thence he went round by Rickjanes, and wanted to land at Vikarski, but there came down a hell giant against him with an iron staff in his hands. He was a head higher than the mountains, and many other giants followed him. He then swam eastward along the land, and there was nothing to see, he said, but sand and vast deserts, and, without the skerries, high-breaking surf. And the ocean between the countries was so wide that a long ship could not cross it. At that time Broadhelge dwelled in Vapnafjord, Ijol Valgordsson in Ijafjord, Thorgeller in Bredafjord, and Thorod in Ulfus. Then the Danish king turned about with his fleet, and sailed back to Denmark. Hakon the Earl settled habitations again in the country that had been laid waste, and paid no scat as long as he lived to Denmark. 38. Harald Gormson's death. Spain, King Harald's son, who afterwards was called Tubuska, or Beard, asked his father King Harald for a part of his kingdom. But now, as before, Harald would not listen to dividing the Danish dominion, and giving him a kingdom. Spain collected ships of war, and gave out that he was going on a Viking cruise. But when all his men were assembled, and the Jomsborg Viking Kalachuk had come to his assistance, he ran into Sealand to Isafjord, where his father had been for some time with his ships ready to proceed on an expedition. Spain instantly gave battle, and the combat was severe. So many people flew to assist King Harald, that Spain was overpowered by numbers, and fled. But King Harald received a wound which ended in his death, and Spain was chosen King of Denmark. At this time Sigvald was Earl over Jomsborg and Vinland. He was a son of King Stratharald, who had ruled over Skane. Hemming and Thorkel the Tall were Sigvald's brothers. Björn the Thick from Bornholm, and Sigurd his brother, were also chiefs among the Jomsborg Vikings, and also Von, a son of Ake and Thorgina, and a sister's son of Björn Sigurd. Earl Sigvald had taken King Svein prisoner, and carried him to Vinland, to Jomsborg, where he had forced him to make peace with Björnsleif, the king of the vines, and to take him as the peacemaker between them. Earl Sigvald was married to Astrid, a daughter of King Björnsleif, and told King Svein that if he did not accept of his terms, he would deliver him into the hands of the vines. The king knew that they would torture him to death, and therefore agreed to accept the earl's mediation. The earl delivered this judgment between them, that King Svein should marry Gunhild, King Björnsleif's daughter, and King Björnsleif again Thyre, a daughter of Harald, and King Svein's sister. But that each party should retain their own dominions, and there should be peace between the countries. Then King Svein returned home to Denmark with his wife Gunhild. Their sons were Harald and Knut, Canute the Great. At that time the Danes threatened much to bring an army into Norway against Earl Hakon. 39. Vow of the Jomsborg Vikings. King Svein made a magnificent feast, to which he invited all the chiefs in his dominions. For he would give the succession feast, or the heirship ale, after his father Harald. A short time before, Stratharald in Skane, and Vishid in Bornholm, father to Bjuthic and to Sigurd, had died. And King Svein sent word to the Jomsborg Vikings that Earl Sigvald and Bu, and their brothers, should come to him, and drink the funeral ale for their fathers in the same feast the king was giving. The Jomsborg Vikings came to the festival with their bravest men, 40 ships of them from Vinland, and 20 ships from Skane. Great was the multitude of people assembled. The first day of the feast, before King Svein went up into his father's high seat, he drank the bowl to his father's memory, and made this solemn vow, that before 3 winters were past he would go over with his army to England, and either kill King Alirad, Ethelred, or chase him out of the country. This heirship bowl all who were at the feast drank. Thereafter for the chiefs of the Jomsborg Vikings was filled and drank the largest horn to be found, and of the strongest drink. When that bowl was empty, all men drank Christ's health. And again the fullest measuring the strongest drink were handed to the Jomsborg Vikings. The third bowl was to the memory of Saint Michael, which was drunk by all. Thereafter Earl Sigvald emptied a remembrance bowl to his father's honor, and made this solemn vow, that before 3 winters came to an end he would go to Norway, and either kill Earl Hakon, or chase him out of the country. Thereupon Thorkel the Tall, his brother, made a solemn vow to follow his brother Sigvald to Norway, and not flinch from the battle so long as Sigvald would fight there. Then he the Thick vowed to follow them to Norway, and not flinch so long as the other Jomsborg Vikings fought. At last Von Hasten vowed that he would go with them to Norway, and not return until he had slain Thorkel Lyra, and gone to bed to his daughter Ingebjorg without her friend's consent. Many other chiefs made solemn vows about different things. Thus was the heirship ale drunk that day, but the next morning, when the Jomsborg Vikings had slept off their drink, they thought they had spoken more than enough. They held a meeting to consult how they should proceed with their undertaking, and they determined to set out as speedily as possible for the expedition. And without delay ships and men-at-arms were prepared, and the news spread quickly. 40. Eirik and Hakon make a war levy. When Earl Eirik, the son of Hakon, who at that time was in Romerike, heard the tidings, he immediately gathered troops, and went to the uplands, and thence over the mountains to Trondheim, and joined his father Earl Hakon. Thord Kopinson speaks of this in the Lay of Eirik. News from the south are flying round. The bomb comes with look profound, bad news of bloody battles ringing, of steel-clad men, of weapons ringing. I hear that in the Danish land, long-sided ships slide down the strand, and, floating with the rising tide, the ocean coursers soon will ride. The Earls Hakon and Eirik had war arrows split up and set round the Trondheim country, and dispatched messages to both the Moors, North Moor and South Moor, and to Romsdal, and also north to Namugo and Halavellen. They summoned all the country to provide both men and ships. So it is said in Eirik's Lay. This fault must now a war song raise, the gallant active youth must praise, who o'er the ocean's field spreads forth, ships, cutters, boats, from the far north. His mighty fleet comes sailing by, the people run to see them glide, mast after mast, by the coast side. Earl Hakon set out immediately to the south, to Moor, to reconnoiter and gather people. And Earl Eirik gathered an army from the north to follow. 41. Expedition of the Jomford Vikings. The Jomford Vikings assembled their fleet in Lee-Nature, from whence they went to sea with 60 sail of vessels. When they came under the coast of Hythe, they steered northwards to Rogaland with their fleet, and began to plunder when they came into the Earl's territory. And so they sailed north along the coast, plundering and burning. A man, by name Garmin, sailed in a light boat with a few men northwards to North, and there he fell in with Earl Hakon, stood before his dinner table, and told the Earl the tidings of an army from Denmark having come to the south end of the land. The Earl asked if he had any certainty of it. Then Garmin stretched forth one arm, from which the hand was cut off, and said, "Here is a token that the enemy is in the land." Then the Earl questioned him particularly about this army. Garmin says it consists of Jomsborg Vikings, who have killed many people, and plundered all around. And hastily and hotly they pushed on, says he, and I expect it will not be long before they are upon you. On this the Earl rode into every fjord, going in along the one side of the land and out at the other, collecting men. And thus he drove along night and day. He sent spies out upon the upper ridges, and also southwards into the fjords. And he proceeded north to meet Eirik with his men. This appears from Eirik's Lay. The Earl, well skilled in war to speed, o'er the wild wave the Viking's steed, now launched the high stems from the shore, which death to six-fold Vikings bore. Rollers beneath the ship's keels crash, or blades loud in the grey sea slash, and they who give the ravens food, row fearless through the curling flood. Eirik hastened southwards with his forces the shortest way he could. 42. Of the Jomsborg Vikings. Earl Sigfold steered with his fleet northwards around Stad, and came to the land at the Hairy Isles. Although the Vikings fell in with the country people, the people never told the truth about what the Earl was doing. And the Vikings went on pillaging and laying waste. They laid to their vessels at the outer end of Hod Island, landed, plundered, and drove both men and cattle down to the ships, killing all the men able to bear arms. As they were going back to their ships, came a bond, walking near to Bu's troop, who said to them, "Ye are not doing my true warriors, to be driving cows and calves down to the strand, while ye should be giving chase to the bear, since ye are coming near to the bear's den." "What says the old man?" asked some. "Can he tell us anything about Earl Hakon?" The peasant replies, "The Earl went yesterday into the Durandalfjord with 1 or 2 ships, certainly not more than 3, and then he had no news about you. You run now with his people and all haste down to the ships, leaving all the booty behind." Bu said, "Let us avail ourselves now of this news we have got of the Earl, and be the first to the victory." When they came to their ships they rowed off from the land. Earl Sigfold called to them, and asked what they were about. They replied, "The Earl is in the fjord." On which Earl Sigfold with the whole fleet set off, and rode north about the island Hod. 43. Battle with the Jomsborg Vikings. The Earls Hakon and Eirik lay in Halfosvik, where all their forces were assembled. They had 150 ships, and they had heard that the Jomsborg Vikings had come in from sea, and lay at the island Hod. and they, in consequence, rowed out to seek them. When they reached a place called Churungavik, they met each other, and both sides drew up their ships in line for an attack. Earl Sigvald's banner was displayed in the midst of his army, and right against it Earl Hakon arranged his force for attack. Earl Sigvald himself had 20 ships, but Earl Hakon had 60. In Earl's army were these chiefs: Thor Hjort from Halagalland, and Sturkar from Jimthur. In the wing of the opposite array of the Jomsborg Vikings was Thudethik, and his brother Sigurd, with 20 ships. Against him Earl Eirik laid himself with 50 ships. And with him were these chiefs: Gutbrand Hvit from the uplands, and Thorkel Leir from Viken. In the other wing of the Jomsborg Vikings array was Vonakason with 20 ships. And against him stood Svein the son of Hathin, in whose division was Skegg of Erger at Uphog, and Rognvald of Eirvik at Stand, with 60 ships. It is told in the Eirik play thus: The Von's ships along the coast sailed on to meet the foeman's host. The stout Earl's ships, with eagle pies, rushed on the Danes in bloody fight. The Danish ships, of courtmen full, were cleared of men, and many a hull was driving empty on the main, with the warm corpses of the slain. Evingshild Espiller says also in the Hilly Jatal: 'Twas at the peep of day, our brave Earl led the way. His ocean horses bounding, his war horns loudly sounding. No joyful morn arose, for in praise they sung, these Christian island men wished themselves home again. Then the fleets came together, and one of the sharpest of conflicts began. Many fell on both sides, but the most fight were on Hakon's side. For the Jomsborg Vikings fought desperately, sharply, and murderously, and shot right through the shields. So many spears were thrown against Earl Hakon that his armor was altogether split asunder, and he threw it off. So says Tine Helgason: The ringling coat of strongest mail could not withstand the iron hail, though sewed with care and elbow bend, by Norn, one, on its strength intent. The fire of battle raged around, Odin's steel shirt flew all unbound. The Earl a spring mill from him flung, it still rings on the wet deck rung. Part of it fell into the sea, a part was capped, a proof to be, how sharp and thick the arrow flight, among the sea steeds in this fight. Endnotes: 1. Norn, one of the Fates, stands here for women, whose business it was to sew the rings of iron upon the cloth, which made these ring-mail coats or shirts. The needles, although some of them were of gold, appear to have been without eyes, and used like shoemakers' awls. L. 44. Earl Sigvald's fight. The Jomsborg Vikings had larger and higher-sided ships, and both parties fought desperately. Vonakason laid his ship on board of Svein Earl Hakon's son's ship, and Svein allowed his ship to give way, and was on the point of flying. Then Earl Eirik came up, and laid his ship alongside of Von, and then Von gave way, and the ships came to lie in the same position as before. Thereupon Eirik goes to the other wing, which had gone back a little, and Bugh had cut the ropes, intending to pursue them. Then Eirik laid himself, board to board, alongside of Bugh's ship, and there was a severe combat hand-to-hand. 2 or 3 of Eirik's ships then laid themselves upon Bugh's single vessel. A thunderstorm came on at this moment, and such a heavy hailstorm that every hailstone weighed a pennyweight. The Earl Sigvald cut his cable, turned his ship round, and took flight. Vonakason called to him not to fly. But as Earl Sigvald paid no attention to what he said, Von threw his spear at him, and hit the man at the helm. Earl Sigvald rode away with 35 ships, leaving 25 of his fleet behind. 45. Bugh throws himself overboard. Then Earl Hakon laid his ship on the other side of Bugh's ship, and now came heavy blows on Bugh's men. Victus, a son of Thagaglam, took up an anvil with a sharp end, which lay upon the deck, and on which a man had welded the hilt to his sword just before, and being a very strong man cast the anvil with both hands at the head of Aslak Holm's skull, and the end of it went into his brains. Before this no weapon could wound this Aslak, who was Bugh's foster brother, and forecastle commander, although he could wound right and left. Another man among the strongest and bravest was Havard Hogond. In this attack Eirik's men boarded Bugh's ship, and went aft to the quarterdeck where Bugh stood. There Thorstein Midlang cut at Bugh across his nose, so that the nose piece of his helmet was cut in two, and he got a great wound. But Bu, in turn, cut at Thorstein's side, so that the sword cut the man through. Then Bu lifted up 2 chests full of gold, and called aloud, "Overboard all Bu's men," and threw himself overboard with his 2 chests. Many of his people sprang overboard with him. Some fell in the ship, for it was of no use to call for quarter. Bu's ship was cleared of people from stem to stern, and afterwards all the others, the one after the other. 46. Vikings bound together in one chain. Earl Eirik then laid himself alongside of Von's ship, and there was a brave defense. But at last the ship too was cleared, and Von and 30 men were taken prisoners, and bound, and brought to land. Then came up Thorkel Lyra, and said, "Thou madest a solemn vow, Von, to kill me, but now it seems more likely that I will kill thee." Von and his men sat all upon a log of wood together. Thorkel had an axe in his hands, with which he cut at him who sat outmost on the log. Von and the other prisoners were bound so that a rope was fastened on their feet, but they had their hands free. One of them said, "I will stick this cloak pin that I have in my hand into the earth, if it be so that I know anything, after my head is cut off." His head was cut off, but the cloak pin fell from his hand. There sat also a very handsome man with long hair, who twisted his hair over his head, put out his neck, and said, "Don't make my hair bloody." A man took the hair in his hands and held it fast. Thorkel hewed with his axe. But the Viking twitched his head so strongly that he who was holding his hair fell forwards, and the axe cut off both his hands, and stuck fast in the earth. Then Earl Eirik came up, and asked, "Who is that handsome man?" He replied, "I am called Sigurd, and am Bu's son." "But are all the Jomsborg Vikings dead?" Eirik says, "Thou art certainly Bu's son. Wilt thou now take life in peace?" "That depends," says he, "upon who it is that offers it." "He offers who has the power to do it, Earl Eirik." "That will I," says he, from his hands. And now the rope was loosened from him. Then said Thorkel Lyra, "Although thou should give all these men life and peace, Earl, Vonakason shall never come from this with life." And he ran at him with uplifted axe. But the Viking Skard swung himself in the rope, and let himself fall just before Thorkel's feet, so that Thorkel fell over him, and Von caught the axe and gave Thorkel a death wound. Then said the Earl, "Von, wilt thou accept life?" "That I will," says he, "if you give it to all of us." "Loose him from the rope," said the Earl, and it was done. 18 were killed, and 12 got their lives. 47. Death of Fisher Valders. Earl Hakon, and many with him, were sitting upon the piece of wood, and the bowstring twanged from Bu's ship, and the arrow struck Kisher from Valders, who was sitting next the Earl, and was clothed splendidly. Thereupon the people went on board, and found Havard Hebon standing on his knees at the ship's railing, for his feet had been cut off, one, and he had a bow in his hand. When they came on board the ship, Havard asked, "Who fell by that shaft?" They answered, "A man called Kisher." "Then my luck was less than I thought," said he. "Great enough was the misfortune," replied they. "But thou shalt not make it greater." And they killed him on the spot. The dead were then ransacked, and the booty brought all together to be divided. And there were 25 ships of the Jomsborg Vikings in the booty. So says time. Many Vikings' body lay, dead on the deck this bloody day, before they cut their sun-dried ropes, and in quick flight put all their hopes. He whom the ravens know afar, cleared 25 ships of war, a proof that in the furious fight, none can withstand the Norsemen's might. Then the army dispersed. Earl Hakon went to Trondheim, and was much displeased that Earl Eirik had given quarter to Vonakason. It was said that at this battle Earl Hakon had sacrificed for victory his son, young Erling, to the gods. And instantly came the hailstorm, and the defeat and slaughter of the Jomsborg Vikings. Earl Eirik went to the uplands, and eastward by that route to his own kingdom, taking Vonakason with him. Earl Eirik married Von to Inga Jorg, a daughter of Thorkel Lyra, and gave him a good ship of war and all belonging to it, and a crew. And they parted the best of friends. Then Von went home south to Denmark, and became afterwards a man of great consideration, and many great people are descended from him. Endnotes 1. This traditionary tale of a warrior fighting on his knees after his legs were cut off appears to have been a popular idea among the Northmen and is related by their descendants in the ballad O. Chevy Chase L. 48. King Harald Grensk's death. Harald Grensk, as before related, was king in Vestfold and was married to Asta, a daughter of Gudbrand Kula. One summer, 8994, Harald Grensk made an expedition to the Baltic to gather property, and he came to Spitsad. Olaf the Swede was king there, a son of Eirik the Victorious, and Sigrid, a daughter of Spalkulaitost. Sigrid was then a widow, and had many and great estates in Spitsad. When she heard that her foster brother was come to the country a short distance from her, she sent men to him to invite him to a feast. He did not neglect the invitation, but came to her with a great attendance of his followers, and was received in the most friendly way. He and the queen sat in the high gate, and drank together towards the evening, and all his men were entertained in the most hospitable manner. At night, when the king went to rest, a bed was put up for him with a hanging of fine linen around it, and with costly bedclothes. But in the lodging house there were few men. When the king was undressed, and had gone to bed, the queen came to him, filled a bowl herself for him to drink, and was very gay, and pressed to drink. The king was drunk above measure, and, indeed, so were they both. Then he slept, and the queen went away, and laid herself down also. Sigrid was a woman of the greatest understanding, and clever in many things. In the morning there was also the most excellent entertainment. But then it went on as usual when people have drunk too much, that next day they take care not to exceed. The queen was very gay, and she and the king talked of many things with each other. Among other things she valued her property, and the dominions she had in Svitjad, as nothing less than his property in Norway. With that observation the king was nowise pleased, and he found no pleasure in anything after that, but made himself ready for his journey in an ill humor. On the other hand, the queen was remarkably gay, and made him many presents, and followed him out to the road. Now Harald returned about harvest to Norway, and was at home all winter, but was very silent and cast down. In summer he went once more to the Baltic with his ships, and steered to Svitjad. He sent a message to Queen Sigrid that he wished to have a meeting with her, and she rode down to meet him. They talked together, and he soon brought out the proposal that she should marry him. She replied that this was foolish talk for him, who was so well married already that he might think himself well off. Harald said, Asta is a good and clever woman, but she is not so well born as I am. Sigrid replied, it may be that thou art of higher birth, but I think she is now pregnant with both your fortunes. They exchanged but few words more before the queen rode away. King Harald was now depressed in mind, and prepared himself again to ride up the country to meet Queen Sigrid. Many of his people dissuaded him, but nevertheless he set off with a great attendance, and came to the house in which the queen dwelt. The same evening came another king, called Lysander, from Vardavan, Russia, likewise to pay his addresses to Queen Sigrid. Lodging was given to both the kings, and to all their people, in a great old room of an outbuilding, and all the furniture was of the same character. But there was no want of drink in the evening, and that so strong that all were drunk, and the watch, both inside and outside, fell fast asleep. Then Queen Sigrid ordered an attack on them in the night, both with fire and sword. The house was burned, with all who were in it, and those who slipped out were put to the sword. Sigrid said that she would make these small kings tired of coming to court her. She was afterwards called Sigrid the Haughty, Storada. 49. Birth of Olaf, son of Harald Grensk. This happened the winter after the battle of the Jomsborg Vikings at Tjørnklevåg. When Harald went up the country after Sigrid, he left Rain behind with the ships to look after the men. Now when Rain heard that Harald was cut off, he returned to Norway the shortest way he could, and told the news. He repaired first to Asta, and related to her all that had happened on the journey, and also on what errand Harald had visited Queen Sigrid. When Asta got these tidings, she set off directly to her father in the uplands, who received her well. But both were enraged at the design which had been laid in Svitjad, and that King Harald had intended to set her in a single condition. In summer, 8995, Asta, Gudbrand's daughter, was confined, and had a boy child, who had water poured over him, and was called Olaf. Grain himself poured water over him, and the child was brought up at first in the house of Gudbrand and his mother Asta. 50. About Earl Hakon. Earl Hakon ruled over the whole outer part of Norway that lies on the sea, and had thus 16 districts under his sway. The arrangement introduced by Harald Hårfagre, that there should be an earl in each district, was afterward continued for a long time. And thus Earl Hakon had 16 earls under him. So says the Valhalla. Who before has ever known 16 earls subdued by one? Who has seen all Norway's land conquered by one brave hero's hand?
Macarena crashed.
It will be long in memory held how Hakon ruled by sword and shield.
And now it's updated.
When tales at the Vikings mast go round, his praise will every mouth resound. While Earl Hakon ruled over Norway, there were good crops in the land, and peace was well preserved in the country among the bonds. The Earl, for the greater part of his lifetime, was therefore much beloved by the bonds. But it happened, in the longer course of time, that the Earl became very intemperate in his intercourse with women, and even carried it so far that he made the daughters of people of consideration be carried away and brought home to him. And after keeping them a week or two as concubines, he sent them home. He drew upon himself the indignation of many relations of these girls. And the bonds began to murmur loudly, as the Trondheim people have the custom of doing when anything goes against their judgment. 51. Thorklake's journey. Earl Hakon, in the meantime, hears some whisper that to the westward, over the Norway Sea, was a man called Ole, who was looked upon as a king. From the conversation of some people, he fell upon the suspicion that he must be of the royal race of Norway. It was, indeed, said that this Ole was from Russia. But the Earl had heard that Trygve Olafsson had a son called Olaf, who in his infancy had gone east to Gardarike, and had been brought up by King Valdemar. The Earl had carefully inquired about this man, and had his suspicion that he must be the same person who had now come to these western countries. The Earl had a very good friend called Thorklake, who had been long upon Viking expeditions, sometimes also upon merchant voyages, so that he was well acquainted all around. This Thor Earl Hakon sends over the North Sea, and told him to make a merchant voyage to Dublin, many were in the habit of doing, and carefully to discover who this Ole was. Provided he got any certainty that he was Olaf Tryggvason, or any other of the Norwegian royal race, then Thor should endeavor to ensnare him by some deceit, and bring him into the Earl's power. 52. Olaf Tryggvason comes to Norway. On this Thor sails westward to Ireland, and hears that Ole is in Dublin with his wife's father King Olafgren. Thor, who was a plausible man, immediately got acquainted with Ole. And as they often met, and had long conversations together, Ole began to inquire about news from Norway, and above all of the upland kings and great people, which of them were in life, and what dominations they now had. He asked also about Earl Hakon, and if he was much liked in the country. Thor replies, that the Earl is such a powerful man that no one dares to speak otherwise than he would like. But that comes from there being nobody else in the country to look to. Yet, to say the truth, I know it to be the mind of many brave men, and of whole communities, that they would much rather see a king of Harald Hårfagre's race come to the kingdom. But we know of no one suited for this, especially now that it is proved how vain every attack on Earl Hakon must be. As we often walked together in the same strain, Olaf disclosed to Thor his name and family, and asked him his opinion, and whether he thought the Danes would take him for their king if he were to appear in Norway.
1.
Thor encouraged him very eagerly to the enterprise,
Defeat.
and praised him and his claims highly. Then Olaf's inclination to go to the heritage of his ancestors became strong. Olaf sailed accordingly, accompanied by Thor, with 5 ships. First to the Hebrides, and from thence to the Orkneys. At that time Earl Sigurd, Haladr's son, lay in Osmundsoll, in the island South Ronaldsa, with a ship of war, on his way to Caithness. Just at the same time Olaf was sailing with his fleet from the westward to the islands, and ran into the same harbor, because Pentland Firth was not to be passed at that tide. When the king was informed that the Earl was there, he made him be called. And when the Earl came on board to speak with the king, after a few words only had passed between them, The king says the earl must allow himself to be baptized, and all the people of the country also, or he should be put to death directly. And he assured the earl he would lay waste the islands with fire and sword, if the people did not adopt Christianity. In the position the earl found himself, he preferred becoming Christian, and he and all who were with him were baptized. Afterwards the earl took an oath to the king, went into his service, and gave him his son, whose name was Hvlp, whelp, or hund, dog, as an hostage. And the king took Hvlp to Norway with him. Thereafter Olaf went out to sea to the eastward, and made the land at Morster Island, where he first touched the ground of Norway. He had high mass sung in attend, and afterwards on the spot a church was built. Thorklakus said now to the king, that the best plan for him would be not to make it known who he was, or to let any report about him get abroad, but to seek out Earl Hakon as fast as possible and fall upon him by surprise. King Olaf did so, sailing northward day and night, when wine permitted, and did not let the people of the country know who it was that was sailing in such haste. When he came north to Regdanes, he heard that the earl was in the fjord, and was in discord with the bonds. On hearing this, Thor saw that things were going in a very different way from what he expected. For after the battle with the Jomsborg Vikings, all men in Norway were the most sincere friends of the earl on account of the victory he had gained, and of the peace and security he had given to the country. And now it unfortunately turns out that a great chief has come to the country at a time when the bonds are in arms against the earl. 53. Earl Hakon's flight. Earl Hakon was at a feast in Medalwas in Galardal, and his ships lay out by Viggjja. There was a powerful bond, by name Orm Lyrgjja, who dwelt in Bunes, who had a wife called Gudrun, a daughter of Bergthor of Lundar. She was called the Lundisal, for she was the most beautiful of women. The earl sent his slaves to Orm, with the errand that they should bring Orm's wife, Gudrun, to the earl. The thralls tell their errand, and Orm bids them first seat themselves to supper. But before they had done eating, many people from the neighborhood, to whom Orm had sent notice, had gathered together, and now Orm declared he would not send Gudrun with the messengers. Gudrun told the thralls to tell the earl that she would not come to him, unless he sent Thora of Rimmel after her. Thora was a woman of great influence, and one of the earl's best beloved. The thralls say that they will come another time, and both the bond and his wife would be made to repent of it. And they departed with many threats. Orm, on the other hand, sent out a message token to all the neighboring country, and with it the message to attack Earl Hakon with weapons and kill him. He sent also a message to Haldoran skirting Steja, who also sent out his message token. A short time before, the earl had taken away the wife of a man called Brynjolf, and there had very nearly been an insurrection about that business. Having now again got this message token, the people made a general revolt, and set out all to Medaldas. When the earl heard of this, he left the house with his followers, and concealed himself in a deep glen, now called Jarlsdal, Earl's Dale. Later in the day, the earl got news of the bond's army. They had beset all the roads, but believed the earl had escaped to his ships, which his son Erlend, a remarkably handsome and hopeful young man, had the command of. When night came, the earl dispersed his people, and ordered them to go through the forest roads into Orkidal. For nobody will molest you, said he, when I am not with you. Send a message to Erlend to sail out of the fjord, and meet me in Moor. In the meantime I will conceal myself from the bonds. Then the earl went his way with one thrall or slave, called Kark, attending him. There was ice upon the gulf, the river of Galardal, and the earl drove his horse upon it, and left his coat lying upon the ice. They then went to a hole, since called Jarashella, the earl's hole, where they slept. When Kark awoke he told his dream, that a black threatening man had come into the hole, and was hungry that people should have entered it, and that the man had said, "Oh, is dead." The earl said that his son Erlend must be killed. Kark slept again and was again disturbed in his sleep. And when he awoke he told his dream, that the same man had again appeared to him, and bade him tell the earl that all the sounds were closed. From this dream the earl began to suspect that it had talked in a short life to him. They stood up, and went to the house of Rimmel. The earl now sent Kark to Thora, and begs of her to come secretly to him. She did so and received the Earl kindly, and he begged her to conceal him for a few nights until the army of the Bonds had dispersed. "Hear about my house," said she. "You will be hunted after, both inside and outside. For many know that I would willingly help you if I can. There is but one place about the house where they could never expect to find such a man as you, and that is the swine sty." When they came there, the Earl said, "Well, let it be made ready for us. As to save our life is the first and foremost concern." The slave dug a great hole in it, bore away the earth that he dug out, and laid wood over it. Thor brought the tidings to the Earl that Olaf Tryggvason had come from sea into the fjord, and had killed his son Erlend. Then the Earl and Thor both went into the hole. Thor covered it with wood, and threw earth and dung over it, and drove the swine upon the top of it. The swine's skull was under a great stone. 54. Erlend's death. Olaf Tryggvason came from sea into the fjord with 5 long ships, and Erlend, Hakon's son, rowed towards him with 3 ships. When the vessels came near to each other, Erlend suspected they might be enemies, and turned towards the land. When Olaf and his followers saw long ships coming in haste out of the fjord, and rowing towards them, they thought Earl Hakon must be here. And they put out all rest to follow them. As soon as Erlend and his ships got near the land, they rowed aground instantly, jumped overboard, and took to the land. But at the same instant Olaf's ship came up with them. Olaf saw a remarkably handsome man swimming in the water, and laid hold of a tiller and threw it at him. The tiller struck Erlend, the son of Hakon the Earl, on the head, and clove it to the brain. And there left Erlend his life. Olaf and his people killed many. But some escaped, and some were made prisoners, and got life and freedom that they might go and tell what had happened. They learned then that the Bonds had driven away Earl Hakon, and that he had fled, and his troops were all dispersed. 55. Earl Hakon's death. The Bonds then met Olaf, to the joy of both, and they made an agreement together. The Bonds took Olaf to be their king, and resolved, one and all, to seek out Earl Hakon. They went up Galador. For it seemed to them likely that if the Earl was concealed in any house, it must be at Rimmel, for Thor was his dearest friend in that valley. They come up, therefore, and search everywhere, outside and inside the house, but could not find him. Then Olaf held a house thing, trusting, or council out in the yard, and stood upon the great stone which lay beside the swine sty, and made a speech to the people, in which he promised to enrich the men with rewards and honors who should kill the Earl. This speech was heard by the Earl and the thrall Gark. They had a light in the room. "Why art thou so pale?" says the Earl, "and now again black as earth? Thou hast not the intention to betray me?" "By no means," replies Gark. "We were born on the same night," says the Earl, "and the time will be short between our deaths." King Olaf went away in the evening. When night came, the Earl kept himself awake, but Gark slept, and was disturbed in his sleep. The Earl woke him, and asked him what he was dreaming of. He answered, "I was at Later, and Olaf Tryggvason was laying a gold ring about my neck." The Earl says, "It will be a red ring Olaf will lay about thy neck if he catches thee. Take care of that. From me thou shalt enjoy all that is good, therefore betray me not." They then kept themselves awake both, the one, as it were, watching upon the other. But towards day the Earl suddenly dropped asleep. But his sleep was so unquiet that he drew his heels under him, and raised his neck, as if going to rise, and screamed dreadfully high. On this Gark, dreadfully alarmed, drew a large knife out of his belt, stuck it in the Earl's throat, and cut it across, and killed Earl Hakon. Then Gark cut off the Earl's head, and ran away. Late in the day he came to Bleeder, where he delivered the Earl's head to King Olaf, and told all these circumstances of his own and Earl Hakon's doings. Olaf had been taken out and beheaded. 56. Earl Hakon's head. King Olaf, and a vast number of Bonds with him, then went out to meet Erlend, and had with him the heads of Earl Hakon and Karl. This home was used then for a place of execution of thieves and ill-doers, and there stood a gallows on it. He had the heads of the Earl and of Gark hung upon it, and the whole army of the Bonds cast stones at them, screaming and shouting that the one worthless fellow had followed the other. They then sent up to Galador for the Earl's dead body. So great was the enmity of the Trondheim people against Earl Hakon, that no man could venture to call him by any other name than Hakon the Bad. And he was so called long after those days. Yet, since to say of Earl Hakon, he was in many respects fitted to be a chief. First, because he was descended from a high race. Then because he had understanding and knowledge to direct the government. Also manly courage in battle to gain victories, and good luck in killing his enemies. So says Thorleif Rodulfsson. In Norway's land was never known a braver earl than the brave Hakon. At sea, beneath the clear moon's light, no braver man e'er sought to fight. 9 kings to Odin's wide domain were sent, by Hakon's right hand slain. So while the raven flocks were fed, so while the wolves were filled with bread. Earl Hakon was very generous. But the greatest misfortunes attended even such a chief at the end of his days, and the great cause of this was that the time was come when heathen sacrifices and idolatrous worship were doomed to fall, and the holy faith and good customs to come in their place. 57. Olaf Tryggvason elected king. Olaf Tryggvason was chosen at Trondheim by the general thing to be the king over the whole country, as Harald Hårfagre had been. The whole public and the people throughout all the land would listen to nothing else than that Olaf Tryggvason should be king. Then Olaf went round the whole country, and brought it under his rule, and all the people of Norway gave in their submission. And also the chiefs in the upland and in Viken, who before had held their lands as fiefs from the Danish king, now became King Olaf's men, and held their hands from him. He went up through the whole country during the first winter, AD 996, and the following summer. Earl Eirik, the son of Earl Hakon, his brother Svein, and their friends and relations, fled out of the country, and went east to Sweden to King Olaf the Swede, who gave them a good reception. So says Thord Kilbinson. O thou whom bad men drove away, after the bonds by foul play, took Hakon's life. Fate will pursue these bloody rolls, and make them win. When the host came from out the west, like some tall stately warship man, I saw the son of Tryggvi stand, surveying proud his native land. And again, Eirik has more upon his mind, against the new Norse king design, than by his words he seems to show, and truly it may well be so. Stubborn and stiff are Trondheim men, but Trondheim's earl may come again. In Swedish land he knows no rest, fierce wrath is gathering in his breast. 58. Lodin's marriage. Lodin was the name of a man from Viken who was rich and of good family. He went often on merchant voyages, and sometimes on Viking cruises. It happened one summer that he went on a merchant voyage with much merchandise in a ship of his own. He directed his course first to Iceland, and was there at a market in summer. To the place at which the market was held many merchant goods were brought, and also many thralls or slaves for sale. Then Lodin saw a woman who was to be sold as a slave, and on looking at her he knew her to be Astrid Eirik's daughter, who had been married to King Tryggvi. But now she was altogether unlike what she had been when he last saw her. For now she was pale, meagre in countenance, and ill-clad. He went up to her, and asked her how matters stood with her. She replied, "It is heavy to be told. For I have been sold as a slave, and now again I am brought here for sale." After speaking together a little, Astrid knew him, and begged him to buy her, and bring her home to her friends. "On this condition," said he, "I will bring thee home to in Norway, that thou wilt marry me." Now as Astrid stood in great need, and moreover knew that Lodin was a man of high birth, rich, and brave, she promised to do so for her ransom. Lodin accordingly bought Astrid, took her home to Norway with him, and married her with her friend's consent. Their children were Thorkel Nefja, Ingrid, and Ingerd. Ingebjorg and Astrid were daughters of Astrid by King Tryggvi. Eirik Jodaskal's sons were Sigurd, Karlsefid, Jostein, and Thorkel Didril, who were all rich and brave people who had estates east in the country. In Viken in the east dwelled 2 brothers, rich and of good descent. One called Thorgeir, and the other Herning. And they married Lodin and Astrid's daughters, Ingrid and Ingerd. 59. Olaf baptizes the country of Viken. When Harald Gormson, king of Denmark, had adopted Christianity, he sent a message over all his kingdom that all people should be baptized, and converted to the true faith. he himself followed his message, and used power and violence where nothing else would do. He sent two earls, Ergutruchet and Brimilskjer, with many people to Norway, to proclaim Christianity there. In Viken, which stood directly under the king's power, this succeeded, and many were baptized to the country folk. But when Svein Forkbeard, immediately after his father King Harald's death, went out on war expeditions in Saxland, Friesland, and at last in England, the Northmen who had taken up Christianity returned back to heathen sacrifices, just as before. And the people in the north of the country did the same. But now that Olaf Tryggvason was king of Norway, he remained long during the summer, AD 996, in Viken, where many of his relatives and some of his brothers-in-law were settled, and also many who had been great friends of his father, so that he was received with the greatest affection. Olaf called together his mother's brothers, his stepfather Lodin, and his brothers-in-law Thorgeir in turning, to speak with them, and to disclose with the greatest care the business which he desired they themselves should approve of, and support with all their power, namely, with proclaiming Christianity over all his kingdom. He declared, either bring it to this, that all Norway should be Christian, or die. I shall make you all, said he, great and mighty men in promoting this work. For I trust ye more, as blood relations or brothers-in-law. All agreed to do what he asked, and to follow him in what he desired. King Olaf immediately made it known to the public that he recommended Christianity to all the people in his kingdom, which message was well received and approved by those who had before given him their promise. And these being the most powerful among the people assembled, the others followed their example, and all the inhabitants of the east part of Viken allowed themselves to be baptized. The king then went to the north part of Viken and invited every man to accept Christianity. And those who opposed him he punished severely, killing some, mutilating others, and driving some into banishment. At length he brought it so far, that all the kingdom which his father King Tldgv had ruled over, and also that of his relation Harald Grensk, accepted of Christianity. And during that summer, AD 996, and the following winter, AD 997, all Viken was made Christian. 60. Of the Hordaland people. Early in spring, AD 997, King Olaf set out from Viken with a great force northwards to Aker, and proclaimed that every man should be baptized. And thus the people received Christianity, for nobody dared oppose the king's will, wheresoever he came. In Hordaland, however, were many bold and great men of Forticair's race. He, namely, had left 4 sons. The first Thorleif spake. The second, Ogmund, father of Thorolf Skeel, who was father of Erling of So. The third was Thor's father of the Hurstpipe who killed King Sigurd Sleppa, Gunhild's son. And lastly, Onund, father of Askell, whose son was Aslak Fitjaskal. And that family branch was the greatest and most considered in Hordaland. Now when this family heard the bad tidings, that the king was coming along the country from the eastward with a great force, and was breaking the ancient law of the people, and imposing punishment and hard conditions on all who opposed him, the relatives appointed a meeting to take counsel with each other, for they knew the king would come down upon them at once, and they all resolved to appear in force at the Gulathing, there to hold a conference with King Olaf Tryggvason. 61. Rogaland baptized. When King Olaf came to Rogaland, he immediately summoned the people to a thing. And when the bonds received the message token for a thing, they assembled in great numbers well armed. After they had come together, they resolved to choose 3 men, the best speakers of the whole, who should answer King Olaf, and argue with the king. And especially should decline to accept of anything against the old law, even if the king should require it of them. Now when the bonds came to the thing, and the thing was formed, King Olaf arose, and at first spoke good-humoredly to the people. But they observed he wanted them to accept Christianity, with all his fine words, and in the conclusion he let them know that those who should speak against him, and not submit to his proposal, must expect his displeasure and punishment, and all the ill that it was in his power to inflict. When he had ended his speech, one of the bonds stood up, who was considered the most eloquent, and who had been chosen as the first who should reply to King Olaf. But when he would begin to speak, such a cough seized him, and such a difficulty of breathing, that he could not bring out a word, and had to sit down again. Then another bond stood up, resolved not to let an answer be wanting, although it had gone so ill with the former. But he stammered so that he could not get a word uttered, and all present set up in laughter, amid which the bond sat down again. And now the third stood up to make a speech against King Olaf's. But when he began he became so hoarse and husky in his throat, that nobody could hear a word he said, and he also had to sit down. There was none of the bonds now to speak against the king, and as nobody answered him there was no opposition. And it came to this, that all agreed to what the king had proposed. All the people of the thing accordingly were baptized before the thing was dissolved. 62. Erlingskjoldson's wooing. King Olaf went with his men at arms to the Gula thing, for the bonds had sent him word that they would reply there to his speech. When both parties had come to the thing, the king desired first to have a conference with the chief people of the country.
Man, I am telling you, buddy. I'm telling you. Actually, I'm gonna put a stop to that. Wow. Yeah. It's time to go feed the babies oatmeal, so I'm gonna sign off. Hopefully things will get better.